I'm very excited to welcome all of you to the third in our Aligned by Design webinar series, which is a series that focuses on opportunities under the new Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act for strengthening coordination of federal workforce education and human services programs. Christina, can we go to the next slide? Great. I just want to highlight a couple of the resources that NSC has put out. Aligned by Design is part of a broader set of resources that we've been putting out around our Realizing Innovation and Opportunity series. So you can, after the webinar, if you have not already taken a look at the materials that we've got on our website, you can see that we have a playbook on creating effective state plans. We did a webinar earlier this year on Engagement Matters, which is a look at New Jersey's WIOA planning process. And then we also have, if you weren't able to catch our earlier webinars in the Aligned by Design series, we had one earlier in June on alignment between WIOA and Perkins Career and Technical Education programs. We also had one on alignment between WIOA Title I and Title II adult education programs. So if you haven't had a chance to check those out, if you weren't able to join us when those webinars happened, you can go to our website and check those out when you get a chance. Can we go to the next slide? So we're going to be focusing today, though, on a topic that I think is of significant interest to a lot of folks in the field. And certainly it's a topic of significant interest to me, and based on the registration numbers, certainly a lot of interest at the state and the local level right now. And that is alignment between the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act and Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or the TANF program. I'm very excited to be joined today by two terrific co-panelists who are experts on both workforce and TANF alignment. Elizabeth Lower-Basch, who is Policy Coordinator and Director of Income Supports for the Center for Law and Social Policy here in Washington. And then Cindy Blakeney-Varner, who's the Assistant Director for Employment Assistance for the Arkansas Department of Workforce Services. I'm very excited to have both of my panelists on today. They're going to be giving us an excellent overview. Elizabeth will be giving an overview of WIOA and TANF partnership, a little bit at the national level, and some of the lessons that we learned about WIA and TANF integration. Cindy will be talking to us about some of the key innovations in Arkansas, how they've integrated TANF into the workforce system under WIA and WIOA, and a little bit about the planning process in Arkansas and how they're integrating TANF into that. Now, before we get to their presentations, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context and a little bit of background about sort of what we're talking about today. So can we go to the next slide, Christina? And just so we're all on the same page and all kind of thinking about where we're coming from in this conversation. So obviously, Congress passed the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act last year, July of 2014. And that WIOA replaces the Workforce Investment Act of 1998. It's a fairly significant overhaul of WIA. I'd just like to note, for those of you who are marking the anniversary, this is actually the first day of implementation of WIOA. Many of the provisions under WIOA start to take effect today, July 1. This is the beginning of the first program year under WIOA. So I'm glad that all of you were able to make it to the webinar today, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about what's going to be happening over the next couple of months and over the next couple of years with implementation and how TANF can be a part of the implementation process. I think it's fair to say that if there's one word or there's one concept that was sort of at the core of WIOA reauthorization, it was this idea of alignment, right? So under WIA, under the Workforce Investment Act, Congress sought to bring together a range of different federal, state, and other workforce education and human services programs under a single roof, under the one-stop center network that was implemented at the state and the local level. But I think it's fair to say that in many cases, while there was an effort at co-location and alignment, and in many jurisdictions there was strong co-location and coordination between programs, there certainly was a feeling that there was still a lot of work to do to make sure that the services that were being offered through the one-stop system and through all the other programs that were covered under WIOA, including the core programs and the mandatory partner programs, that there was still work that could be done to strengthen alignment between those programs. So WIOA made a number of significant policy changes that were intended to help strengthen this alignment both between the core programs and the mandatory partner programs. Can we go to the next slide, Christina? As we noted at the beginning of the webinar, we put out, in partnership with the Center for Law and Social Policy and the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, last week we put out a fact sheet that outlined some of the policy changes and some of the new areas of alignment that we think will be helpful for strengthening coordination between the workforce system under WIOA and TANF programs. We've got on this slide, you can see we've listed a couple of the number of the topics that we identify in the fact sheet. I'm not going to go through all of the topics now because we're going to go into a fair amount of detail on each of these elements throughout the course of the webinar. I did want to highlight the first two bullet points on this slide because I think these are the two most urgent and relevant changes for thinking about WIOA and TANF integration right now. So one-stop partnering, one of the biggest changes under WIOA was that TANF is now a mandatory partner program under WIOA in the one-stop system. So unlike under WIOA, where TANF was an optional partner, under WIOA, TANF services now are required to be offered through the one-stop system unless the governor of the state opts TANF out of the one-stop system. So in some jurisdictions, this will just be a continuation of co-location and coordination that's already been happening. But in a lot of other jurisdictions, I think this is going to be a fairly significant change because TANF has not always been co-located or coordinated with the workforce system under Title I. So this is going to represent a fairly significant change for a lot of jurisdictions. It's an opportunity for local boards, one-stop operators, and other partner programs to work more effectively with the TANF program and for TANF to be more successfully integrated into workforce services. But it will also present a set of challenges, and I know Elizabeth and Cindy are going to talk about some of those barriers and some of those opportunities in their presentations. The other major thing to kind of keep in mind about WIOA is the state unified and combined plan requirements under WIOA. So this is a new requirement. Under WIOA, states are now required to develop what are known as unified or combined plans. Under the unified plan, states have to submit a single plan to the Departments of Labor and Education that covers the 6 core programs that are funded under WIOA. So that's the adult dislocated worker and youth programs under Title I, the adult education programs under Title II, employment services under Title III, and vocational rehabilitation services under Title IV. So at a minimum, states have to submit a unified plan. States also have the option of doing what's called a combined plan, which is a plan that would include all of the 6 core programs and at least one other of a set of identified programs at the federal level, which can include TANF, can include SNAP ENT, can include Perkins CTE, and a set of other programs. Regardless of whether you do a unified or a combined plan, though, states do have to identify in their state plan how the core programs, the Title I, II, III, and IV programs, will be coordinated with the other mandatory partner programs like TANF, SNAP, and Perkins. So there is both an opportunity but also a sense of urgency from the perspective of TANF agencies and TANF advocates to start thinking about what their role is in the state planning process. And I think for workforce, for the workforce side, this is an opportunity to think about how, again, to think about partnering with TANF agencies and TANF providers to think about how you can strengthen and leverage resources across the system. So we're going to talk about all these other bullet points as we go forward through the webinar. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to hand it over to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is going to talk to us about a little bit more detail about WIOA and TANF alignment.
Hi, thank you, Kermit, and thank you so much for having me today. So, go through very briefly just some of the opportunities and challenges that TANF programs face in contemplating partnering with the WIOA system. So, if we can go to the next slide. So, sometimes people begin this process by asking, how can TANF and WIOA align better or coordinate better? And I'd suggest that that's not the right question to begin with, but that the place to start with is, how can partnering expand access to quality services for disadvantaged people, including TANF recipients? And I do think there are reasons to think it can. Co-location can expand both clients' and workers' knowledge of other programs so that they can do cross-referrals and take advantages of services. One of the things that we hear continually is that employers hate getting two separate calls from two separate job developers who don't know about each other and are just duplicating activities and wasting their time. So you can reduce that. When you look at TANF in the context of labor market information and workforce programs, it may create an opportunity for TANF agencies to revisit what are the allowable activities for TANF participants to use to meet their participation requirements. And it can encourage workforce agencies to make sure that if they're running programs, particularly career pathways, they have all the pieces in place to ensure that low-income and disadvantaged workers succeed. Next slide. So one example of, sorry, I'm having a little bit of feedback. One example of why it can be so important to think of these programs before is illustrated by this data, which comes from a report that came out just in May. And it shows that over 60% of people who received TANF assistance at any point between 2009 and 2012 received it for between 1 and 12 months, and much smaller share received TANF assistance for longer periods. And so you think about it, if someone comes in, they're a TANF recipient, they're trying to get into a training program, they may well not be a TANF recipient by the time they finish, even a relatively short-term certificate program. And certainly if you're looking at a full career pathway, much of the time they're not going to be a TANF recipient. They're going to be moving off and possibly back on to cash assistance. So if the services are seamless, it's a much higher likelihood that that individual can finish the career pathway. If I could have the next slide. Sorry, next slide, please. But it's also important to remember as we think about these programs together that there is a history and that in some cases collaboration has not been effective and that there are good reasons that programs have chosen not to co-locate or integrate their services. The two programs have very different performance measures which can pull them in different directions. The WIOA performance measures and the employer focus has sometimes led them to focus on more skilled recipients, people who have more work experience, who have fewer barriers to employment compared to most TANF recipients, although there are certainly TANF recipients who do have more skills and more work experience, but the majority do not. Meanwhile, on the TANF side, the work participation rate requires tracking of attendance and hours. It's a process measure rather than an outcome measure. And more broadly, the two programs have very different cultures of mandatory versus voluntary programs. If I could have the next slide, please. So if you are coming from the workforce world, this is the very quick overview of the TANF work participation rate, which I could do a whole webinar on. But the main point is that only a specific list of programs are countable towards the work participation rate. And in general, education and training is quite limited in how it can be counted. Vocational education training can be counted as a full-time activity for only 12 months in a lifetime. And there's also a cap on the share of participants who can be counted that way. And job skills training, education related to employment, is generally only counted when combined with 20 hours per week of core activities. There is an exception for teen parents, but other than that, it's quite limited. So in many cases, TANF agencies have simply said, no, we're not counting education and training. Everyone has to do job search. Everyone has to do community service or work experience programs, and really close that door. And in those places, they often have very little relationships with their workforce agencies. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. The other thing to note is TANF is, of course, a very flexible funding stream. And in a few minutes, we'll hear in Arkansas about how TANF funds have been used quite effectively and creatively to support career pathways. But it's worth some people have this notion, perhaps, that TANF has lots of unspent funds sitting around and that are available to support workforce activities or supportive services for participants who are engaged in work-related activities. And it's just worth noting that the unspent funds, the unobligated balances, have gotten much smaller over time. And in many states, there simply are no funds sitting around. So any new funds that go to workforce activities have to come out of some other activity where they're already going. Next slide. And building on that, if you look at where states are spending their money, nationally only 6% of TANF funds, including state spending, is going to work-related activities. And of that, of all TANF spending, only 1% is being reported as education and training. There are exceptions, and I highlighted one state, Hawaii, that does spend much more of its TANF budget on education and training, but in general, education and training is a fairly small piece of how states are spending their TANF funds now. Next slide. So I know Kermit won't be asking more questions soon, but I did want to highlight that CLASP does also have many resources on WIOA, and you can find them on our site under WIOA Game Plan. So thanks so much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that presentation. And I do encourage folks to visit clasp.org and check out their WIOA Game Plan materials. A lot of great resources available there. I'm going to turn now to turn us over to Cindy Blakeney-Varner, who, as I mentioned, is the Associate Director of, or Assistant Director of Employment Assistance at the Arkansas Department of Workforce Services. And Cindy's going to talk to us about how Arkansas has been aligning WIA and TANF and is planning to align WIOA and TANF. Without further ado, Cindy, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Kermit. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the webinar today. I did want to talk about, and Kermit asked me to talk about some of the activities that we've been doing in Arkansas over the last 10 years now in aligning the TANF program within the workforce development world. This was done at the action of our state legislature, who really wanted the TANF program to have a workforce focus versus a social service focus. And so in 2005, they did transfer the TANF program to the Arkansas Department of Workforce Services for our agency to administer the program. And we still have a very close connection with our Department of Human Services in the delivery and in eligibility determination. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about was definitely facilitated and made more easy because we now own the TANF program and administer it. But there's Many of the examples that I'm going to give that can be done in any state, even if the workforce agency is not administering the TANF program, it will take a very strong partnership and high level of coordination with your human service agency or whichever state agency is administering the program. But we have definitely seen some great outcomes from our integration. After the legislature transferred the program to us, we did relocate all of our TANF case managers and staff from the Department of Human Service offices into the workforce centers so that we could get them sitting next to their workforce development peers to facilitate more direct referral amongst the programs, and recognizing that we were all likely serving the same customer but doing it in silos. And so all of those staff were relocated to workforce centers. And if we could go to the next slide, please. We not only co-located the staff within the centers, but we've worked very hard to integrate the activities of those staff. We went in, it was a big accomplishment, one, just to move all of those staff into the workforce centers, but after a little bit of them being there, we realized while they might be co-located, they still were very siloed off and operating under their former policies and procedures. And so we've worked really hard to integrate those individuals within the workforce development world and training them on some of the workforce products that our WIOA, or under this would have been WIA Title I service providers, we're using, as well as our Wagner, Pizer, and VET agency staff. Some of those that we did train them on was labor market information. We found that the TANF staff were not as familiar with the information that's out there about the job market, about occupations that are in demand, what those occupations pay, where they might connect them for training in those occupations. So we've done a significant amount of work in training them on labor market information tools. We've also trained them on our Arkansas Job Link, which is our version of our Wagner Pizer employment services system, so that they could go out and assist their customers in looking for work for the TANF customers and helping them gain employment more quickly. We also trained them in the Career Readiness Certificate Program, which is a statewide program in Arkansas for assessing their readiness to go to work, looking at through the ACT assessments, reading, math, and locating information. We've got a significant number of employers in Arkansas that recognize that in their hiring procedures. And so we have that process in place for our TANF customers now as well. And lastly, we trained them on occupational skills assessments through a system that we have a subscription to, is TORC, which takes a look at individuals' past work experience. And it looks for jobs that are actually vacant positions, and what training, if any, they may need. What's the skills gap between their experience and the job that's available right now, and how can we get them the training? And it even tells them where they can go to get the training. So that was one step towards integrating. We also have those TANF staff now reporting to daily our managers that oversee our unemployment insurance program, our Wagner Pizer program, and our veterans, Jobs for Veterans state grant program. And so that helped to better integrate them into the system so that when there's staff meetings in the center, they still aren't siloed off. They're having conversations about wraparound services, referral to other partners, et cetera. We could go to the next slide. We go to the next slide. One of the things that we found when we took over the TANF program was that there was a great deal of flexibility in the use of the TANF funding. When the TANF program first came to our agency, for the first 5 years, I served as the state TANF director, and having served in that capacity, as well as served for 10 plus years as the WIA administrator, I can tell you that the state planning process for TANF is much easier and flexible than it is on the DOL side of the house. What we found is, if you're not familiar with the four purposes of TANF, please make yourself aware of those, but we found a great deal of flexibility really in the top two, which highlights providing assistance to needy families so that children can be cared for in their own homes, and reducing the dependency of needy parents by promoting job preparation, work, and marriage. And we, in exploring those two purposes of the four, started looking at opportunities for starting to fund workforce development activities for our TANF customers. And probably the one that we invest the largest amount of money in is our Career Pathways Initiative. This initiative is started in 2005, and it was funded the first year at $8 million. It's gone, and this is per year, it's gone to as much as $12 million. This last year, just under $7 million is being awarded, and this is actually going directly through our Department of Higher Education agency and out to our two-year colleges across the state. We have 22 two-year colleges as well as 3 technical institutes, and the funding is going straight there for them to provide short-term trainings and occupational skills training to TANF customers, TANF-eligible customers. The second opportunity that we found was in doing a summer youth employment program, partnering with our local workforce development boards. The funding was actually awarded to those boards to provide a youth work experience for the children, the youth of families who are on TANF or that are TANF eligible. And so we've had great success, the most recent of that being 2,900 youth statewide receiving a summer youth employment opportunity, and we were able to fund that at just under $5 million. And lastly, we've been able to use TANF funds for additional support of the Arkansas Workforce Center infrastructure. As most of you, I'm sure, know, our funding is not going up in most cases, and so we've tried to get really creative in how we can continue to provide the same level of service with limited or declining funding. And so TANF has really helped us with that, in that with the staff being located or co-located in the centers, they're assisting with the infrastructure of those centers through paying lease payments for the space they occupy, helping to pay for the common space, such as resource centers. They've also assisted with helping to pay for the Wagner-Pizer employment service system because they're now using it. And we were able to fund a unique program that trained career development facilitators that were placed out in school districts and had a strong connection with the two-year schools, and helping the youth of these families determine a career path and begin preparing for that while they're still in high school. Another benefit that we found through the centers and having TANF with us is what Elizabeth referred to earlier, is not having too many folks knocking on the doors of our employers. And so those TANF staff are serving on our business liaison teams within the centers, and now on board with a common outreach to employers rather than us having multiple partners reaching out. We could change the slide, please. Lastly, I just wanted to highlight on some of the activities that we've got going on. While we've had 10 years now to really realign TANF within our workforce system, some of the activities that we're doing as we plan for WIOA. We have had established last fall a WIOA planning team that is from multiple state agencies representing all of the core programs, in addition to our trade adjustment assistance programs, our VETS programs. Carl Perkins, Higher Education's president, as well as K through 12, and TANF is on that team as well. In addition, our TANF my peer that oversees TANF now has provided a dedicated staff member to me as the lead in implementing WIOA in Arkansas for our agency, has provided a dedicated senior staff member from the TANF program that now on the WIOA implementation team and helping to develop cross-program policies and taking those before our state workforce development board. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight is prior to WIOA coming into effect, the TANF board, we had a separate state TANF oversight board, and through the process of establishing the state WIOA legislation in Arkansas, that board was repealed and now is a standing committee of the State Workforce Development Board, just to make a stronger connection between having TANF and the workforce goals all moving towards the same direction. And that's all I've got, Kermit.
Okay, so thank you, Cindy. It does great presentation, and a lot to unpack there. So what I want to do now is I wanted to sort of talk to you guys about a couple of the other areas that we identified in the alignment fact sheet, the WIOA and TANF alignment fact sheet. Some of the key innovations or new opportunities under WIOA and what implications those have for WIOA, what implications those have for TANF, and how we should be thinking about that. I know that we, both of you touched I think did a great job of sort of talking about one-stop partnering and the role of TANF in the one-stop system. I did want to ask, any other thoughts or comments that you had about the one-stop process? Any barriers that folks should be thinking about that we haven't already highlighted? Any opportunities that we haven't already highlighted? Okay, fair enough. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I just want to highlight what Cindy said about how initially that they had co-location, but we're still sort of operating siloed within the co-location. And I just note that there really is a range of ways to partner, and it really, looks differently, and even in places that really do have quite collaborative systems, so that you can collaborate on some parts and not others. And it's really a state choice of what you want it to look like.
I think that's a fair point. Any other thoughts or comments on one-stop partnering?
Well, just to piggyback on that, Kermit, that took a lot of significant work and a lot of staff cross-training, but the benefit far outweighs the effort that you have to put in to make that happen, because now we have in place, where we have almost a built-in direct referral. A lot of times we would see with our TANF clients, if we needed to refer them to adult ed, if they weren't in the center, we refer them, but they may not ever show up on the other end. And so having that direct link there, where not only can they take them, hold their hand and take them directly to the workforce development person that can assist them, but also having the staff cross-trained to provide those services themselves, where they didn't have that before. The next thing we're kind of focusing on is how to make our computer systems talk to one another. And so we're engaged in heavy conversation on how we make that happen, but we're committed to eventually having not only our core partners in that common intake and case management system, but also our TANF program.
I think that's a fantastic point. I think that a lot of times when we talk about alignment, we don't always recognize the importance of data sharing and data alignment. So that's certainly something that states and local areas and other stakeholders should be looking at as they think about how to successfully partner. It works in making sure that the data systems and other processes are able to talk to one another, because it's very difficult to make these programs work if the systems aren't able to talk. So I'd like to move on from one-stop partnering and move on to the next slide. And talk a little bit about state planning, a little bit more about state planning and your thoughts on state planning. And in particular, I want to start this with you, Cindy. So can you talk to us a little bit more? It sounds like TANF is certainly playing a role in the state planning and implementation process for WIOA. Can you talk to us a little bit more about, give us a little bit more detail on what you guys are thinking and how TANF is being contemplated as part of that state planning process, and knowing that we're still early in the game. Can you give us a little bit more context on that?
Sure. In Arkansas, we're leaning more towards the combined state plan, and we're trying to get as many partners involved as possible that are outside the core partners. And I highlighted some of those earlier, but TANF definitely is a integral part. We're very excited that they're a mandatory partner now. We've been wanting that for some time. And what we're looking at now across all of the programs, including TANF, is making sure that we have policies that are not siloed and the procedures within a center are not siloed, so that when an individual walks in, the process is customer-centered versus program-centered and not doing what's beneficial for us as program administrators, but what's beneficial for our customers, whether that be a job seeker or an employer. And so I think, as I mentioned before, having our systems talk to one another. In fact, I had a meeting this morning on that very subject with the TANF senior staff about that topic of we've got to have data that tells us how we're serving the customers and that we're providing wraparound services and supportive services to these individuals, and that we're tapping into all the resources that we can because of the limitation that we have. I don't know that we're ever going to get much more funding, so we've got to do better with what we've got. But as I mentioned before, we've got dedicated staff that have been loaned to us for a 6-month period to work solely on the state plan in working with the State Workforce Development Board members and making sure that TANF has a voice in that planning and that they're engaged in that process.
Terrific. And Elizabeth, I wonder if you could maybe share some of your thoughts on, for other states and for local areas as well, because there's a local planning process. What are some factors that stakeholders ought to be thinking about, whether it's at the agency level or at the advocate level, to ensure that the needs of TANF recipients are being addressed as part of the planning process?
Sure. So I would definitely say that we would want to see TANF agencies and other human services agencies and stakeholders, people representing the client point of view, at the table for the planning discussion. I think I've had, I think 3 different people in the past month tell me the line of, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So I think there's an important that, and particularly some of the new provisions in WIOA, particularly the emphasis on priority of service and the emphasis on earn and learn models, which I know we're going to get into later. I think TANF agencies are much more able to contribute to if they're part of the discussion. I think the end result of whether you wind up with 2 separate plans that are both influenced by the same planning process, or if they're officially one document, matters less than that people are at the table and talking to each other.
Great. And I should note, I know some folks had submitted questions about the sort of the timeline for the state planning process. So state plans are due states are required to submit those state plans, whether they do a unified plan or a combined plan, by March of 2016. I know that the Departments of Labor and Education are going to be circulating guidance on the planning process at some point later this year. So once that guidance comes out, I know that we'll certainly send that out to the field, and I know CLASP will also send that out to the field. But that's sort of the basic timeline for state planning. I want to.
Right.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Cindy.
Oh, that wasn't me.
Oh, okay. Then I'm going to, did you have a comment, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I was just going to say, both the feds are saying, and we'd agree with, don't wait on the guidance to start the conversations, that there's just a lot of work to be done. So it really does make sense to start talking now about what's your vision. Yes.
No, I think that's a great point. So I want to move on to the next slide and the next topic, and I think this is something both of you, I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on this, and that's around career pathways. So, career pathways, obviously not a new concept. It's been in the workforce and human services professionals have been working with career pathways for many years. But WIOA does make some policy decisions around, or does have some policy requirements around career pathways. For the first time, we have a federal definition of a career pathway and what the elements are. There's a requirement that local boards partner with secondary and post-secondary partners at a minimum to develop and implement career pathways at the local level. There's also a requirement that for each individual enrolled in WIOA youth services, that there has to be a career pathway embedded in the individual service strategy. So not necessarily every adult who gets served through WIOA or TANF needs a career pathway, but certainly every youth who gets served is supposed to have a career pathway identified as part of their individual service strategy. I wanted to start this question with Elizabeth, because I know that CLASP has done a lot of work with states and with local areas in developing and implementing career pathways across the country. I wonder if you could share us a couple of thoughts about sort of the career pathways requirements and how TANF in particular can be a part of career pathway development moving forward.
Sure. So I think this goes back to the point that I made earlier about people's duration on TANF usually being relatively short. And I think that's caused a lot of TANF agencies to sort of look at career pathways and these multiple credentials leading to not just a job, but really to a career and a better job. And sort of been like, wait, what's the role for us? Because we're really more focused on, if any training, mostly short-term training. But I think the notion is that that training shouldn't be standalone and separate from everything else that's going on. And so we talk a lot about stackable credentials, which means that you get credit for the training that you've already had if you go back and get more training. And also we think it's really important that career pathways include supportive services so that people can succeed both in education and training, but also in employment.
Okay. And Cindy, I know Arkansas has done, you were talking about during your presentation, Arkansas has a career pathways initiative that is supported through TANF and supports TANF participants. I don't know if you wanted to expand a little bit more on that program, sort of what are the career pathways that are supported, how does that work, what are some lessons that you've learned in the implementation of that career pathways initiative in Arkansas?
Sure. We do have a career pathways program. It's been in place for about 10 years, as I said before, and this really is our base for our model of what we will implement under WIOA. We've had much success in reaching out and training, I believe, in those 10 years, just TANF-eligible families, the parents of those families. We've trained over 27,000, and they've received some type of college-level certificate or associate degree, and some have even gone on to go to four-year schools. But this program is intended right now for current or former recipients of transitional employment assistance, which in Arkansas is our primary TANF program. In Arkansas, the state legislature limits our TANF service under TEAV to 24 months. So that really puts the onus on our agency in working with those individuals to assist them in getting some type of occupational skill or becoming career ready so that they can move on to employment that will support their families and that can get them off of public assistance. So right now it's designed for those individuals. We are looking at taking that as our model for WIOA, but there are career pathways in all types of occupations. Every one of the two-year colleges looks at the programs that they already have and has developed a career pathway starting, some even from recognizing that some of these parents may not have a high school diploma. And how do we help them through that, through the adult education program, and then to ultimately receive some type of college-level certificate or associate degree. The focus for our program is really on increasing enrollment for this population, increasing attainment of the college-level credential, and also increased job attainment and job retention. We've had quite a bit of success with this particular program in studying the completers of this. We found that over 80% retain their employment after they've gone through it. The program not only connects them with resources to pay for their education, but each of the 22 two-year colleges and the 3 technical institutes all have dedicated staff on hand that are dedicated to this population to provide them counseling and support as they make their way through the two-year college system. Many of these individuals have maybe the first generation to go to school, and so they don't know how to work through the system or what they need to do when they're there, and so there's someone there that can counsel them on those steps and to help them. If the folks listening in want to know more about it, they can look this up on the website. It's arpathways.com, and it has quite a bit of information as well as some publications. We're actually working now with CLASP as a phase 2 project, and then we've also been chosen as one of the Alliance for Quality Career Pathways initiatives nationally. So, and we'd be glad to answer any questions or assist others if they're interested.
Terrific, terrific. So I want to move on to the next slide in the interest of time, and I want to talk a little bit about TANF and youth programming. WIOA makes a lot of changes to the youth programming under Title I, which I think are, generally speaking, good changes, strong changes to make the program more effective for a broader range of youth. It expands the eligibility age for out-of-school youth up to the age of 24. There's a requirement now that 75% of local funds need to be targeted towards out-of-school youth as compared to the 30% minimum under WIA. There's also a much stronger emphasis in the youth program on work-based learning models. So 20% of local funds in the WIOA youth space have to be spent on some form of work-based learning, and that can include summer jobs, but it can also include pre-apprenticeship, subsidized and unsubsidized employment, and other strategies, work-based learning strategies. I wanted to get both of your thoughts on sort of how the changes to the WIOA youth program may impact the interaction with TANF, or how TANF can be a part of these new youth programs and these new youth strategies. I'd like to start, actually, Cindy, asking you. So you mentioned the summer jobs program that you guys are currently running in Arkansas. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how your thinking is, how the changes under WIOA have impacted your thinking around TANF and WIOA integration?
Sure. I'll have to admit, we're still trying to think through all the aspects of that, especially with the change in focus to out-of-school youth.
Fair enough.
But what we think will be helpful, I mean, I talked earlier about the summer work experience and that partnership between TANF and the local workforce development boards and our agency on that. But what has been helpful in the past is the ability to coordinate with the local boards or with the service providers and reaching out to those families that are already on the TANF program and identifying the youth that, you know, obviously are low income, and trying to connect them with the services that are in the center as well, not just their parents. And so under WIOA, we're kind of looking at that same model of trying to find and reach out to those families, especially those whose youth are not engaged in school, and making them a priority. So that's what we're looking at. We certainly have not figured out all the nuances of that. It has historically been difficult to locate those youth once they're out of school, and so we're hoping through that partnership and having that connection directly with the TANF parents that, especially those who are out of school, we can connect with.
Okay, great. And Elizabeth, I wonder if you could give us some, I know, again, CLASP has done a lot of work on youth programming over the years. Can you give us a little bit of some of your thoughts on WIOA, youth, and TANF integration?
No, we do think this is an exciting opportunity. Quite large share of TANF adult, quote unquote adults, the parents, are youth by the WIA definition. I know Washington State, they just did the numbers and had about 30%. We don't have exact national numbers, but it's probably similar to that in most states based on we can do up to 29 using the nationally available data. And it's a significant share of TANF parents. And frankly, TANF programs don't often think of these parents as youth. If you think about other youth being encouraged to do training, being encouraged to do career pathways, in many cases that has not been the case for TANF programs. So I think there's just a huge value to remembering that these are young adults with a lifetime ahead of them, and that we want to get them off to a good start, as well as their children, of course. And And also in some places we've heard that some of the youth programs that have not traditionally served as many out-of-school youth are sort of perhaps nervous about the new provisions and asking where can we find these out-of-school youth.
Sure.
And one of the places you can find them is in your TANF and in your SNAP program.
Great point. Great point. Okay, so I want to move on to the next slide and talk about two more subjects, and then I want to open up for questions from the audience. And Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you specifically, so under WIOA, the priority of service requirements have been strengthened. So under WIOA, there was a priority of service requirement for low-income individuals, but it was a priority that only triggered in instances where funding was limited. Now the new requirement is that priority of service for Title I adult funding has to be made available to recipients of public assistance, low-income individuals, and basic skills deficient individuals. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how this the shift to this new priority of service requirement will benefit TANF recipients, and maybe talk a little bit about how local areas should be thinking about designing their priority of service policies?
Sure. So I do think this is a big step in a positive direction to making sure that WIOA programs do serve more disadvantaged workers, including public assistance recipients. I think a lot will depend on how it's implemented, and that's one of the reasons that TANF agencies and stakeholders should get involved in the WIOA process of planning to make sure that everyone takes priority of service seriously. And just examples of what that might look like is that it's not just about sort of waiting lists, but it's also really about what services are offered. And if the only training programs that you have available require an 11th grade reading level or have lots of other restrictions that keep people who are basic skills deficient out, then you're not really implementing priority of service. Or if you're not providing the supportive services that people need to participate.
Okay. And then last but not least, and then I want to open it up for questions from the audience. I want to talk about, actually, Christina, can we stay on this slide? Thanks. So when we did talk about this a little bit already with the youth piece, but certainly work-based training models for both youth and adults are a much greater focus under WIOA. There's a great deal of emphasis on strengthening alignment between the workforce system and apprenticeship. There's a number of new options that are encouraged, including incumbent worker training and customized training and on-the-job training for adults. There's expanded opportunities for, as we mentioned, for youth. I wanted to ask, just before we move on to the audience questions, and I do think that there's, TANF providers and TANF agencies in many cases have a lot of experience in implementing work-based models, both just because of that's a way that they've helped connect their participants to employment. But also, I know that under the Recovery Act, there was some additional funding under the Emergency Fund to help support subsidized employment programs. So I wanted to ask both of you, and we can start Cindy and then move to Elizabeth, if you could talk a little bit just in general about how work-based learning can benefit TANF recipients, but also, maybe talk a little bit about how TANF can help support the development and implementation of work-based learning strategies more generally.
Certainly. Since I've already kind of hit on the youth focus, I'm going to focus really more on adults in the TANF program. But we were fortunate enough a few years back to be awarded one of the energy sector partnership grants. And that was probably one of the best grants. I know that was not the case nationwide, but that was one of the best grants that we have ever operated because it was really a catalyst for our partnership with Registered Apprenticeship. We had been trying to figure that partnership out for many years, and There just seem to be too many loopholes within the WIA system for the registered apprenticeship folks and vice versa. And that particular grant really kick-started our partnership with them, and it has been strong ever since. We've got several initiatives going on right now, a new sector partnership that's not just focused on energy, but several different industries, a nursing partnership that's statewide with employers and with our two and 4 year schools, as well as with registered apprenticeship. And TANF continues to be one of our priority populations as we implement all of those, especially in working with the registered apprenticeship model and making sure that they are able to connect with that. And that has proven very successful for us in some cases accelerated apprenticeship, where we can train folks more quickly and get them into employment, and that certainly has worked well for our TANF population.
And Elizabeth, can you talk to, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this as well.
Sure. So overall, I think work-based training is really beneficial for almost all people who need training, both because it's the way to, get the work skills in the real life set context, and also many people can't afford to focus on training full-time if they're not also earning wages, so this lets people combine. I think for TANF particularly, it also has the advantage that work-based training is generally not subject to the restrictions on education and training for the work participation requirements that apply to many other training programs under TANF. So subsidized employment and on-the-job training can be counted towards the work participation rate without restriction.
Okay, great. Well, so thank you guys both for your presentations and for your thoughts on these on all these issues. And I'm glad, Cindy, that you mentioned this focus on sector strategies and sector partnerships. I think while we didn't really cover that in the presentation today, it is important for folks on both the workforce side and on the TANF side, and really all of the programs that are implicated in the workforce system, to keep in mind industry and sector partnerships, which are partnerships between multiple employers, workforce boards, labor unions in unionized industries, and institutions of higher education and other partners. These are now a required activity at the local level, and states are required to support the development of industry or sector partnerships. And we think that these are a great way to structure workforce development investments at both the state and the local level, and also an opportunity for TANF agencies and for TANF stakeholders to be engaged in a proven strategy. If you haven't already started working with industry or sector partnerships, if they haven't been implemented yet in your area, or if TANF agencies haven't been engaged in that process, we definitely think they should be, because sector strategies, sector partnerships are a strategy that has been shown to have terrific results for, particularly for low income and other hard to serve populations. And so definitely yet another opportunity that WIOA creates for better integration and alignment between these programs. So, so I want to make sure that we have time for some audience questions. So what I'd like to do now, you can, and I know that we've already gotten a bunch of questions in, so we'll try and start with those. But if you have some question that you want to ask any of the panelists, you can go ahead and enter that question in the chat box on the right side of your screen. What I'd like to do is I'd like to hand it over to my colleague Rachel Zinn, who's going to who's going to walk us through some of the audience questions.
Thanks, Kermit. A quick reminder to the audience that we will be sending out a recording and a copy of the slides, so those will be available. Let's see, we've gotten a few questions about accountability. So if some of the speakers can talk about, perhaps Cindy, you can start us off by talking about, in Arkansas, what kind of performance outcomes is TANF held accountable for as a one-stop partner?
That's a great question.
Well, right now they still are held accountable for the TANF standards. but one of the priorities that we have right now is in developing a, you would call it a workforce system report card for each location. And are you able to hear me? There's quite a bit of feedback. Are you hearing me now? Hello?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. But that's one of the things that we're working on with our newly formed State Workforce Development Board is having a report card not only for the system but for each partner's role in achieving that. But right now they just are responsible for the TANF specific measures.
Great. And Elizabeth and Kermit, do you have a sense of how other states might be approaching this as they think about combined plans that include TANF, how they're approaching accountability?
I think states are really still figuring it out. There are a number of states that do, for TANF, track outcome measures in addition to the process measure. That's the workforce education rate. But in many cases, that's not exactly the same as the workforce measures. So
sure.
Definitely.
I will this is a good point. This is probably a good time to sort of, for folks who are not familiar with the WIOA system and the changes that were made under there, just to clarify, the WIOA changes the performance metrics that are used for the workforce system in some fairly significant ways. First, it establishes a set of common performance indicators that cut across not just the Title I workforce programs, but also the Title II adult education programs, the Title III Wagner-Pfizer employment services, and the Title IV vocational rehabilitation programs. And there are indicators that relate to employment in the second and fourth quarter after exit from the program. There's earnings measures. There's measures of credential attainment, attainment of a recognized post-secondary credential. There's a measure relating to skills gains, measurable skills gains, and then a measure on employer effectiveness, effectiveness in serving the needs of employers. When states are submitting their unified or their combined plans, one of the things that they'll be required to do is they'll be required to submit proposed performance levels for each of those indicators across each of their the 6 core programs. This is going to be a fairly significant change, I think, for sure for the states. And I agree with Elizabeth. This is a lot of folks are probably still trying to figure out what this is going to mean, what they're supposed to be negotiating, what their levels should be for each of these programs. But I do think there is, as we're thinking about state planning and what performance looks like across each of the core programs, we should also be thinking about how TANF fits within the overall the goals and this overall strategy that the state has for making sure that low income and low skill individuals have access to training and have access to economic opportunity. So that's my comment on the performance indicators.
Can Elizabeth elaborate on that a little bit and maybe talk about ways that WIOA does allow for service to TANF recipients and other participants who may be hard to serve, those with low skills, those with multiple barriers to employment?
Sure. So I guess there's 2 points to make. One is that, as Kermit indicated, we think the interim measures that show progress towards employment, even for people who are perhaps starting further from the ultimate goals, are important because it does let you get credit even if they might not be employed right away. The other is, of course, the reintroduction of what there used to be under JTPA and then went away under WIOA of regression adjustment, so that literally your calculated performance measures are adjusted so that you get more credit for serving people with greater barriers to employment including public assistance recipients. Some have also suggested that that could be an incentive to states to do better assessments of their clients, because if you don't identify people's barriers to employment, you don't get any credit in the regression for them.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Angel Garcia for Cindy. Can you talk a little bit about how employers have been part of the Arkansas Career Pathways Initiative, things like curriculum development, on-the-job training, et cetera?
Sure. They've been very involved. Each of the 25 institutions that receive grant funding from the TANF program are required to have saying an employer advisory panel may be a little too formal, but definitely have relationships with employers in their communities, their service communities, and making sure that they're training individuals in career pathways that actually there are jobs in those areas for them to obtain after they complete their training. So the employers have a great deal of input, one into what occupations are in demand, what type of skills that they need. And there's a strong connection. Each of our two-year schools has a workforce development arm that works with employers all the time. And so there's a partnership between those two programs to make sure that what the areas in which these TANF participants are being trained, that there's jobs on the other end. As far as curriculum development, there's definitely input from employers on the skills that are needed. And so that's included in the curriculum. Which then ultimately would be pushed up for approval by the Higher Ed Coordinating Board at the state level.
Thanks, Cindy. We have a question from Todd Lee asking whether there are any models for alignment involving adult basic education as well as TANF and the workforce system. Hearing silence, so we may have to think about that one and get back in our webinar frequently asked questions.
Yeah,
well,
go ahead.
No, but I was just going to say, using the word model, I don't know that I have any specific model to share as it relates to adult education, but we've had a really strong partnership with them in the past, and WIOA has just strengthened that. Many of our workforce center locations were co-located with adult education, and where we're not, they're co-located with the two-year schools, which is where the Career Pathways program is. So I don't know if I have a specific model to share other than it takes a lot of communication and working that partnership.
Yeah, I'm just adult education has probably been the hardest thing for people to figure out how to align with the TANF work participation requirements. I do think, it is worth thinking, particularly some of the immigrant and limited English proficiency programs, which are also often funded under Title II, and many TANF agencies do coordinate with them when appropriate.
Great. So we're coming up on time, so I think we'll end the question and answer session here. And Kermit, you want to wrap us up?
Yes, I do. And thank you very much, Rachel, for those great questions. And I know we got a lot of questions, additional questions that were submitted through the online system. So I wanted to let folks know that we will be pulling together an FAQ document in the next couple of weeks. Where we'll seek to address all of the questions that were raised. And that FAQ document will be sent out to all the folks who signed up for the webinar, and we'll post it on our website when that's available. So if you didn't get your question answered, and I know there were a lot that we didn't get to, we will get to those, but I do want to be conscious of time. I want to say thank you so much to Elizabeth Lower-Basch and to Cindy for participating in today's webinar. I think I learned a lot about WIOA and TANF integration, and I'm really looking forward to working with you guys as we move this process forward. And with that, I'm gonna can we go to the next slide, Christina? I'll just flag for folks, again, today is the first day of WIOA implementation. So this is the beginning, I think, of what will be a multi-year process. I did want to flag for folks who may not be as familiar with the WIOA implementation process. The other two major dates, and we mentioned the unified or combined state plans are due March 3rd. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we're expecting to have the final WIOA regulations published by the feds in January of 2016. So they, if you haven't had a chance to look, the Departments of Labor and Education published draft regulations called a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking that covers a broad range of activities, including one-stop integration, one-stop services, issues around infrastructure funding, et cetera. Those are available on the DOL website, and we will make we've got that available. We've got comments. I know CLASP has submitted comments, and National Skills Coalition submitted comments. So if you're interested in information about that, you can find both our comments and the regulations on both CLASP and the National Skills Coalition website. And I'd like to say thanks to everybody for participating in today's webinar, and have a great day.
Thank you.